Hello, my name is Yamada-Rice, and I'm here today to talk about games and play to engage research participants, of course, particularly children, in projects about change. I have a few different hats on. One, I work for a video games and research company called Dubit, based in the UK, and I also work as a senior lecturer in immersive storytelling in the School of Digital Arts at Manchester Met Uni. I frame myself, excuse me, as an information experience designer to inform the production of play. And what that means is it's about how can we engage research participants, again, children, in the research process, so that being a part of the research process not only provides us with data that could inform products for them, but is also an experience in its own right. So how can we include them in a co-production or a co-design way in order to think about change that's needed in their lives? So I'm just going to present a few snippets of various projects today, which relate to that approach to data collection, and particularly with a focus on projects that are specifically looking to bring change to children's lives. So the first project is called Countermeasures, and this was a project that I worked on with a colleague called Angus Main to look at how can we explore with children the sensors that are inside their digital devices, and what might be their interest in subverting these or blocking these so that the information that they collect about them are not necessarily accurate. And the reason that I was interested in this project was first to understand what do children know about the sensors inside their digital devices, but also if they were able to choose which sensors they wanted to turn off or they wanted to block so that the information was not accurate, would it mean that we would have to collect more qualitative information on children's lives? So would we have to then turn back to talking to children about their lives in order to make products that suit them better? So rather than just scraping data off the back end of the devices that they make, we make for them, and pooling together these big data lakes that collect information on them and then saving that information in order to produce products, what if we had to revert back to more qualitative ways of engaging children? So the images that you can see here on the screen relate to work that was done by Angus, which was kind of how can you use everyday materials, cardboard, pencils, to think about techniques that can make this subversion possible. So you may have heard of things like Fitbits being connected to insurance, for example, health insurance, and people trying to trick those sensors that make it look like they're living a healthy lifestyle by throwing their Fitbit in the tumble dryer. So kind of building on that idea of how can you subvert the data using everyday materials. Again, so building on this idea that data collection can be an experience, we wanted to really draw on methods of making and design with the children, and really sort of think about a hands-on approach for engaging children in these potentially serious topics. This study was undertaken during lockdown. So originally we had planned to meet with children face-to-face, to carry out a series of workshops to teach them about the sensors, to understand their desires in blocking them, and then to think about co-creating techniques for doing that. In the end, we had to collect the data via Zoom online. So what we began to do was to think about how can we still maintain those arts and design methods, but at a distance. So the first thing that we noticed on the project was that children had fairly limited knowledge about what was inside their devices. And to give you an example, you can see from these two illustrations that children did about what they thought was inside their devices. they had a kind of mixture of really old tech, so they would believe, you know, there would be wires inside an Alexa, which is what you can see at the top here, right the way down to the kind of speculative, imaginative idea that there's an actual robot inside with a face, and so on. So we realized that perhaps their understanding of digital sensors was perhaps not as sophisticated as we had expected it to be. And then often this related to how well the sensors could be seen in relation to having an effect on their device. So for example, they were familiar that a laptop, like I'm using now, would have a camera, that the camera could see you if you were online, and what to do, for example, to, you know, put a sticker or your thumb over that camera if you wanted to prevent that from seeing you. However, where there was no clear output from the sensors to the physical interface, they found it much harder to understand what those sensors would be doing, where the data would be generated, how it would be generated, and where it might go. In keeping with these arts and design-based methods, we also drew on an approach of using cultural probes. Cultural probes is, again, a term from design where you send out a physical prompt, and that physical prompt, by its nature of the materials, encourages you to engage in an interactive way in the data collection. So here are some examples from the founders of cultural probes. And what we did in response to this was to use the mail, the physical mail system, and to send out an envelope, as it were, a package of physical materials. Now, these physical materials, we deliberately chose them for their colours, the materials that were tactile and sort of sensory, but also that there would be an element of, for example, the two clear clips in the middle of the screen of what could those be? So sort of really trying to get children to be interested in the materials from the outset. And the idea then was, after teaching them about the sensors in their devices, we would set them particular tasks. So we would say, okay, your parents want to make sure you're exercising or doing, you know, 10,000 steps a day. And you would rather not be doing this. How can you trick your device to believing you're doing it when actually you're not? So again, the idea here was not to subvert or go against what parents' wishes are, but to use these as an example to really get children to question what are the digital sensors in their lives doing embedded inside their devices, and what's that data used for. So here was a group who were working with the Nintendo Switch, and again really beginning to explore how can we use these kind of ideas of cultural probes to kind of show what's inside the device. So here was me building the inside of the Switch out of Lego, and then you can see these kind of eye marks for the Lego where I was kind of pinpointing and showing, you know, these are sensors that can do certain things, and sometimes these sensors are on, eyed wide open, and, you know, sometimes something you does generates whether that sensor is sensing information or not. And then we asked them to download this free app, Jump, and we said, can you invent a device that will make your Nintendo Switch think that you're jumping even when you are not. So here again was me playing around with the idea of kind of having the controllers and sensors inside the controllers balancing on this piece of Lego, and hopefully kind of rocking to give the impression that you're skipping when you are not. Children's ideas were much more imaginative than mine or adults who've been involved in an earlier project. And often included ideas around speculation. They included their pets, but also included ideas about what they would be doing with their time instead whilst they were tricking these devices. So this middle one here, this was a device, a speculative design to attach your phone to your cat. And whilst your cat was out roaming the neighbourhood, it would take your phone with you. and therefore counting steps, but they were actually the cat steps, and so on. On the right is a very similar device, which is a rocker. So you put your phone into the rocker. The child who made this was like, I'd be on the sofa kicking it, it would be swinging. My parents would think I was walking, whereas actually I'd be on the sofa drinking a milkshake and watching TV. So again, just really thinking about how can we use these kind of physical methods of making and designing and doing in order to engage children in thinking about change and why change might happen. And even though I myself as a researcher was quite critical of some of the sensors inside digital devices, children were actually quite open to the idea that at times they were really necessary. So they would start talking about, well, you know, when we're going on holiday with my parents, you know, Google Maps allows us to know when there's a traffic jam coming up because of the sensors inside the phone. So I wouldn't want to turn that off because I wouldn't want to be surprised by a traffic jam. We might want to stop at a service station and so on. So again, really sort of critically engaging through these processes of making with their ideas towards change and what changes they wanted in their lives. Again, this led to me thinking about what does this mean? What do their ideas of speculative design mean? So using drawing as a way of kind of capturing their ideas, so that device for attaching it to your cat being sort of played out there. And really trying to think about what can alternative methods other than just talking to children or perhaps surveying children and so on, how can we learn and understand about their lives, which are fundamentally, of course, different to those of adults. Again, and then Angus in his work was keen to kind of take these into 3D renders, to think more about what children's speculative designs might mean in relation to a 3D modelling space. So this was a child's design for blocking all forms of sensors inside their smartwatch, for example. And then again, at the end of this project, so sort of really seeing this as a whole cycle in which children are beginning to think about what is their knowledge, how can we add to their knowledge, how can they be a part of design processes, and then also how can we disseminate the ideas that they share with us back to other children. So again, working with a group of MA design students here, we came up with the idea that we would make a very simple website called I Spy Sensors that would allow other children to open up the smartphone, for example, look inside, see these icons that related to digital sensors, and then to get more information about those sensors. So again, this information came about through the working with children, what interested them. And what we learned was that they were really interested in some of the detailed information. So for example, that the camera in an iPhone is so sensitive that it could take a photograph of somebody across a room. You could zoom into it, see their fingerprint in detail, and that fingerprint could actually be used for something. So again, those kind of snippets of information about digital sensors, which are, I suppose, surprising to many adults, were really engaging to children as well. And they were sort of talking about how they don't learn about these things in such detail in their school lives too. So here again was some of the illustrations based on the children's designs that we then disseminated back through this website to other children, with the caveat on the end of, you know, do you have your own idea? Could you design something better? So really trying to sort of continue that loop of creating and thinking. So then this moves in to another project. This was actually not specifically about change yet, but it was looking at children's use of the metaverse, particularly Roblox. And it was again undertaken in lockdown, and it was thinking about, well, how can we talk to children about their use of Roblox, but perhaps embedding their interest in Roblox within that as well. So I came up with an idea that we were going to create a research space within Roblox, and I would invite children into that space. They would know that I was a researcher up front, but there would be something about being in the Roblox space where I wasn't detaching them from the thing that they were interested in, but kind of being in that space and hopefully, I suppose, enlisting their enthusiasm and using the space as a prompt to promote their kind of focused discussions around that. So the first image right at the top was the first iteration of that. So it was very much a formal space of kind of going, okay, well, we're going to need a few chairs for children to sit on, and they're going to gather in this space and then talk about Roblox. And it was a little bit like Goldilocks and Three Bears. Like, this was so cold. It was dull. You know, children would come in, they were used to running around in Roblox, and then suddenly you're like, can you sit on the seat and talk to me about the space that you like, but in a very kind of methodical way. So then I swinged the other way, and I was like, okay, I'm going to create this world where there's a pirate ship and they can roam around the island, and I'm going to talk to them about Roblox at the same time. And this was a little bit like too hot, you know. I spent the entire research sessions running after them, asking them questions about Roblox. The pirate ship sank, you know, the ship's cat died at the bottom of the ocean, and all these things happened, and the amount of information I got for the research project was fairly minimal. So then I set about trying to find this happy medium of kind of putting prompts into the space, gathering research participants in that space within Roblox, and then talking to them. And this then leads on to how I've used this approach for embedding children again in these online spaces in relation to a project about climate change. And so I was working with Tutti Frutti Theatre Company, who are a theatre company based in the north of the UK. And they were interested in the possibility of virtual spaces for allowing children opportunities to talk about the climate crisis and climate change in ways that might be perhaps more freeing than can be done at school. And so we tested two methodologies. So the first was Clickroom, which is an online virtual world. It allows you to upload images. It allows you to upload videos. Children are given a pseudonym, a fairly basic avatar, as you can see, and allow them to discuss this topic without judgment. And I think one of the things about this space that made it really great was that everyone has a say. So even if you're fairly quiet, you know, you can be typing, and you know, nobody can cut into you typing your response, and your response will always come up. So it kind of encouraged everybody to talk in a way that perhaps an in-person focus group might not be able to do as well. And once I'd had this information about children's ideas around climate change, particularly about how could they make a difference to their local environment, what would they like to happen in relation to their local environment, in relation to climate change and so on. And I used this information to build a specific space within Roblox, which would then allow the children to come in and then talk about those things further. So one of the things that they talked about a lot, because they were shown a video in relation to forest fires as a prompt in the first space, was this notion of a forest fire. So we started off by this forest fire to recap on things that they had told me last time. And then also we transitioned to this, you know, to this school environment. And they had said to me that one of the things they'd really like to do would be just have bicycle racks at their school so they could cycle to school, or to have cycle lanes so they would feel safe in cycling to school. So we were able to meet them and say, do you remember when you told me you wanted a bicycle rack? Was this how you were envisaging it? And then use these as prompts to, you know, think of other ideas. So they would run around, the virtual school thinking of other ideas that could be used in their local neighborhood in real life to address this topic of the climate crisis. And one of the things they had come up with is this idea of a climate hero. So the idea that one person can make a difference, and thinking about what could they make a difference in relation to, what could signal that you are somebody who wants to make a change to the climate situation and so on. And because I was working with a theatre company, the theatre company were also really interested in thinking about the role perhaps of costume or mask making or performance or physical materials, and thinking about how might, again, what the children tell us feed back into productions on this topic and then be shown again to child audiences. So this idea of kind of repetition and circles of kind of collecting data, of bringing children into that, throwing it back out, the findings to children's audiences and repeating and repeating and so on. So in relation to that, used a series of avatars within Roblox to create kind of costumes. So the ones you can see down here on the left were potential, avatar skins for the climate hero of Animal Lover. And again, using that as a prompt to get them further talking about this idea of, what would a climate hero do? Would they really want to signal it in this way? And then later on to think about, what might this mean for physical making of costumes and feeding back into this performance of a theatre performance of the same topic. And then again, this idea of kind of Easter eggs or open-ended play. So whenever I'm doing research, whether it's about, change or any other topic, to really think about how can you create open spaces so that you get the chance to collect data that you might not have been anticipating. So how can you kind of, create a world that might have prompts but allow children to take control of the research in a direction that you weren't anticipating. Over there you can see this red car. This was actually based on the children's ideas that, should Elon Musk give everybody a free Tesla, that the world would be a better place. So I built the Tesla in there to, whether you agree with that or not, to be based on their ideas and prompt further discussion. And of course, then they could climb in those cars, drive them around, and then really begin to think about what was the meaning of their initial ideas. Did that work for them, and so on. And again, on the picture on the left, you see an urban fox. And again, this was just another prompt based on things that children were talking about, of being inner city kids, and then sort of the value that they attach to kind of inner city wildlife and so on. So this was a kind of nod to that, but then again, in this open space where they could potentially take that off in a new direction. So again, another project. This was looking, again, working with the same theatre company, but looking at the benefits of good sleep patterns. And the idea of this was to really try to make a fundamental change in children's understanding of why sleep is important and the benefits of good sleep. And we were working with children's health specialists, the Children's Sleep Charity in this area, and so on. So one of the things that we were really aware of is the idea for kids that like staying up late and getting no sleep is kind of cool, particularly young kids, and kind of really wanting to understand, do they already have a sleep routine? What do they think constitutes good sleep? And so on. So in order to do this, I worked in schools and took in these materials, took in an old doll's house, took in these really, really exhausted insomniac Lego minifigures who had important jobs like, being an astronaut or an Olympic swimmer and so on. And just let them work in teams and said, these Lego minifigures, they haven't been able to sleep for months, they're exhausted. What can you do to design ways for them to sleep? And here are some of the things that they made here. And then you're able to use those designs that they've made as a data set and look for reoccurring themes. So for example, this one in the middle were magic heating rings that would heat you up to the perfect temperature, and then you would automatically fall asleep. And the plasticine one on the right was a similar theme. So they made these giant special magical trousers that would again heat you up to the perfect temperature. You'd fall asleep in the magical trousers, and then they would eject you and throw you into bed and you'd be asleep. So again, even though these designs are speculative and imaginative, you know, you could begin to say, okay, so they're really aware that being a good temperature is important for getting a good night's sleep, and so on. And then coming back again, the idea of once this is changed into a play, so this was changed into a play called Sweet Dreams, when the audience then engage with this play on a stage, can we continue to engage audiences and collect further data on this topic? So again, working with a group of MA students, their names are at the bottom, was really sort of went to them with a brief and said, okay, you're going to have a theatre load of people in the audience. We want to find out, what do they do, or what is the last thing that they do to help them go to sleep at bedtime, and so on. So they came up with this idea, again, really pushing the idea that it has to be an experience for children. It can't just be, excuse me, a survey. It has to feel like you're participating in something beyond that. And they came up with this idea of a kaleidoscope. And everyone who attended the play's performance would be given a kind of transparent token. You can see a couple of them here, such as a light, a teddy bear, or a smartphone. And depending on what they used to help them go to sleep, they would slot one in the front of this kaleidoscope. And then depending on how many of each particular thing got built up, when you looked through the kaleidoscope, you would get different patterns. So that was kind of the original idea of thinking, okay, so we prompt involvement in this research. We also keep the research topic, the prompt for change around sleep patterns. Oops, sorry. Thank you. And then brought that back in. Sadly, this project wasn't realised because this part of the project, because of COVID, the production in the end had to become a radio show. And this led to the final iteration of this, which was to think about, if nobody can go to the theatre, but they're listening to it now as a radio performance rather than something that was in the theatre, how can we collect data using the screen as a kind of interactive way? So here again, we took this same idea. So this is the question you can see on screen of, where do you fall asleep? And children would drive this toy racing car that was on a bedroom floor and towards one of these tokens. And again, at the end of this game, there was a space for this kind of open-ended exploration of a children's bedroom. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of a few different projects where I've specifically been working collaboratively to bring about change in children's lives, but really thinking about how design and materials, whether they're physical or digital, can be brought to engage children into that process of change in, I suppose, more creative and imaginative ways. And that's it. Thank you for listening.